Hello and welcome to week 4 of the Nevermoor Series Readalong. I'm Jess Townsend, the author of the Nevermoor books, and this week we have kicked off with the first 9 chapters of Wundersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow. I'm going to jump straight in because guess what? This is the week. I feel it in my bones. This is the week when I magically fit this entire recap into one video. And if you are from the future and you are watching this video and laughing at me because it's called part 1 of 2, then shame on you, and also shame on me a little bit, but also shame on you. Let's do it. Let's go. Chapter 1, The Angel Israfel. So it's Spring's Eve, which also means that it's Morrigan's birthday. So Spring's Eve, by the way, is kind of like, or the equivalent of our New Year's Eve. And Morrigan and Jupiter are running through the crowds in Bohemia. Bohemia is a borough in Nevermoor. It is where all of the music halls and playhouses and theatres and fancy restaurants and seedy pubs are. And it's where all of the kind of theatrical, interesting, musical, bohemian types tend to gather and live and work. And Morrigan is fascinated because she's never been there before, but she can't really stop and enjoy it because Jupiter is pelting ahead of her and she is just trying to keep up and not get lost. Their destination, via a weird stinky little alleyway, which Jupiter refers to as a little bit tricksy, note that down for later, is the old Delphian music hall, which is hard to get into. Lots of people, it's an if you know, you know kind of thing, and Jupiter does know. And they get backstage and Jupiter hands Morrigan a pair of earmuffs and he says, put these on because the angel Israfel is about to sing. This is who they've come to see, the angel Israfel. And Morrigan says, but I want to hear him sing. And Jupiter says, no, you definitely don't want to hear the angel Israfel sing because it will be the sweetest sound you'll ever hear, he said. It will trigger something in your brain that will bring you a perfect and unbroken peace, the best you could ever hope to feel, and will remind you that you are an entirely whole human being, flawless and complete, and that you already have all you will ever want or need. Loneliness and sadness will be a distant memory. Your heart will fill up and you'll feel the world could never disappoint you again. Sounds dreadful, Morrigan said in a flat voice. It is dreadful, Jupiter insisted, because it's transient, because Israfel can't keep singing forever. And when he stops, eventually that feeling of perfect happiness will fade away, and you'll be left here in the real world with all its hardness and imperfection and muck. It will be so unbearable, and you will be so empty. It'll feel as if your life has stopped, as if you are trapped in a bubble while the rest of the world carries on living imperfectly around you. Morrigan sort of sees the effect of this play out because she's looking in the audience and she sees these people who just look so desperately wanting. And the angel Israfel appears. He is a man of such strange otherworldly beauty that Morrigan actually gasped. The angel Israfel floated in midair, held aloft by a pair of powerful, sinewy wings, feathers black as night, veined with iridescent glittering gold. They protruded from between his shoulder blades, beating slowly and rhythmically. He must have had a wingspan of at least 3 meters. His body, too, was strong and muscular but lithe, and his cool black skin was veined in tiny rivers of gold as if he had been broken apart like a vase and repaired with precious metals. And as Morrigan watches the audience, she sees that they are overcome at his arrival. He hasn't even started to sing yet, but they are fainting and falling over each other just to get closer to him. And she thinks it's a little bit cringe. It's like, how embarrassing. But then he does start singing, and the audience stopped moving, and they looked as if they might never start back up again. A still, abiding peace descended like snow. And Morrigan can't hear any of this, of course, because she's wearing the earmuffs, but she sees the effect that the angel Israfel has when he opens his mouth to sing. So Morrigan and Jupiter skip out on the rest of the show. They go backstage into a dressing room where they can't hear him because there's a big steel door, take off their earmuffs, and they wait for the angel Israfel to arrive. Jupiter is cleaning up the very messy dressing room. It's very clear as soon as Israfel arrives that he and Jupiter are old, very good friends. And also Israfel is a bit miffed at Jupiter because Jupiter has been being Jupiter and he's kind of disappeared. He's been neglecting his friend. We realize that Jupiter has sent Israfel a letter asking him to be the 9th signatory to Morrigan's Safeguard Pact. Israfel sort of says, why should I? And Jupiter can't think of a reason, but he still hopes that he will. And Israfel has put 2 and 2 together, even though Jupiter hasn't told him that Morrigan's a Wundersmith, and he realizes the only thing that could possibly tempt the great Jupiter North into becoming a patron is if this kid is a Wundersmith, and of course he is correct. Despite that, he signs the Safeguard Pact very reluctantly. And as Morrigan and Jupiter are leaving, he says one more thing. He says, I suppose you've heard about Cassiel. And Jupiter's like, what about him? So Cassiel, whoever this mutual acquaintance is of theirs, has disappeared. And Jupiter finds that very, very hard to believe. He's like, that's impossible. I don't believe it. Israfel says, nope, for sure, he has disappeared. And Jupiter promises to look into it. So Morrigan and Jupiter leave the old Delphian. And as I said before, it is Morrigan's birthday. And Jupiter says, listen, I'm sorry. I know that I promised you there wouldn't be a big fuss made for your birthday, but I think that Frank has probably made a big fuss. Don't worry, I told him to rein it in and keep a lid on things, and he's not going to go overboard. He really won't, because I'm the boss and he respects me. But of course, when they arrive at the Hotel Deucalion, Frank has not reined anything in. Frank's never reined anything in his life. And it's just a spectacular party. There's a big sign on the rooftop that says Morrigan is 12, and there's cake and fireworks and music and a crowd of people and presents and all sorts of things. And Jupiter very sheepishly apologizes to Morrigan, but it's quite clear that Morrigan is very chuffed about this because she's never had a birthday party before in her life. So, end of the night. Morrigan's exhausted. She falls asleep almost the moment her head hits the pillow. Then, what felt like half a second later, she was awake. She was awake and not in her bed. She was awake and not in her bed and not alone. Chapter 2, Sisters and Brothers. So Morrigan is awake outside in the middle of the night, and she would be frightened about this, except her best friend is beside her. There is Hawthorne Swift, and not only that, all of the new members of Unit 919, her 8 new brothers and sisters, are all standing in a line beside her, and they are outside the gates to Wonsock, the Wondrous Society campus. So this is their inauguration, and the gates in front of them have a big floral display that says, "Come in and join us." And the society means that quite literally. They're saying, come inside so you can officially join us in your inauguration. They walk up the long driveway towards Proudfoot House, which is lined with the extinct fire blossom trees. But this time, inside the trees are hundreds of Wondrous Society members, young and old, and they're wearing their black cloaks, and they have candles, and they're wearing their gold pins, and they're perched like birds in the trees. And it's not frightening, it's kind of welcoming and reassuring. They're all watching their 9 new members walk up towards Proudfoot House, and as they're walking, the society members in the trees are chanting an oath, and it's an oath that Morrigan recognises because it was sent to her handwritten from the society to memorise, because she will have to recite it as part of her ceremony. It goes, "Sisters and brothers, loyal for life, tethered for always, true as a knife, 9 above others, 9 above blood, bonded forever through fire and flood. Brothers and sisters, faithful and true, ever together, the special and few." Now, while they are walking up towards Proudfoot House, it is this kind of bizarre welcoming parade. It's a spectacular of a bunch of very disparate things that kind of don't make a lot of sense together, and there are lots of things to look at, lots of things that are vying for their attention. So a couple of society members conjure a rainbow to arch over them as they walk underneath it, and there's a marching band that plays music, and there are elephants that start trumpeting, and there are 2 dragons in the sky, and they spell out the names of all 9 society members, and those names are, so that we know who our Unit 919 is: Archon, Anar, Cadence, Francis, Hawthorne, Lambeth, Mahir, Morrigan, and Thadia. And they reach Proudfoot House, or the front steps of Proudfoot House, where all of their patrons are, and they all get taken inside the house, while all of the society members outside cheer and applaud them, and it's quiet inside. And compared to the big flashy spectacle that happened outdoors, this is a very brief, basic, quiet ceremony. They recite their oath, they are given their golden pins by their patrons, and ta-da! They are members of the Wondrous Society. The elders say, "Patrons, you need to stay behind and your candidates can go and wait outside." And Morrigan can tell from the reaction of the patrons that this is unusual, and so she's feeling a little suspicious. But the 9 kids go outside. All of the society members have now completely disappeared. They're outside alone, and they're 9 kids who have just been kind of shoved together. They don't know each other, except for Morrigan and Hawthorne, of course. There's like awkward silence and awkward giggling, and they don't really know how to introduce themselves. But luckily Hawthorne is just not a kid who cares about awkward silences, and he starts talking to Archon Tate, who is the pickpocket, the kid who was playing the violin and pickpocketing everyone in the Trolloceum. And he says, "How did you do that?" And Archon at first thinks that he's in trouble. And he says, oh my gosh, did I steal something of yours? Did you get it back? But Hawthorne is just thrilled. He's like, it blew our minds. We were blown away. You're amazing. And so it's broken the ice. They're starting to chat and be friendly, but the doors of Proudfoot House fly open. The patrons all come storming out. It's clear that something has gone wrong. And the thing that has gone wrong is that the elders had to tell the other patrons what Morrigan's knack is. They had to tell them that Morrigan is a Wundersmith. And of course, we already know what the reaction will be to that, because Wundersmith equals Ezra Scroll equals the most evil man in the realm, and or the evilest man who ever lived, as they call him. And Hester Fitzwilliam, who is Frances's patron and also her aunt on her dad's side, is just furious and is demanding answers, demanding to know how they know, and is she a danger? And she wants to rip Frances out of the Wondrous Society. She wants Morrigan to be kicked out. She's just all over the place, and Baz Charlton agrees. And Mahir's patron, Grace Mulryan, I don't think we learn her first name in this book, but her name is Grace Mulryan. She is just terrified, and Nan Dawson is kind of the voice of reason. So there's kind of mixed reactions amongst the patrons and also amongst the scholars, the candidates, although generally they just look really scared. And Morrigan is starting to feel like she's back in the Wintersea Republic, that she's back to being the cursed child that everyone is terrified of. But when Hester says, I'm going to pull my scholar out of here, we're going, and I bet all of these other ones want to leave as well, Elder Quinn calls her bluff and she says, fine, whoever wants to leave can leave, but it's not a decision for the patrons. Scholars, we understand that these are unusual circumstances. If you want to hand over your golden pin and leave Unit 919, we will ask no questions, you can just go. And of course none of them do, because they've all worked so hard for this. None of them are about to hand over that golden pin that's given them a ticket to their brightest ever future, and they all stay. But Elder Quinn issues a warning at the end of all this. She says, you have to keep this a secret. To share the truth would be to cause mass panic. That means that with very few necessary exceptions, the scholar mistresses, for example, and the conductor of Unit 919, the fact that we have a Wundersmith among us must remain a secret known only to those of you now present. And she looks at all of these kids and says, you are a unit now. You are responsible for each other. You are accountable to each other. Therefore, if anyone at all is found to have broken our trust, Elder Quinn paused, her face grave. She looked at each one of them in turn, until finally her gaze landed on Morrigan. Then all 9 of you will face expulsion from Woonsock for life. So the stakes are very high. Chapter 3, The Knot Tattoo and the Knot Door. So the next morning, Morrigan thinks it could all have been some strange and terrible dream, except for the tattoo that has shown up overnight on her index finger. It's a little golden W, just like her pin. And Jupiter says over breakfast, it's not a tattoo. I wouldn't let them give you a tattoo. Tattoos hurt. Does it hurt? And she says, no, it doesn't hurt. It feels just like it's there. And it doesn't seem like something that has been inflicted. It's not a scar. It's not a wound. It almost feels like it has pressed itself from the inside of her skin to the outside. She just woke up, and before she'd even opened her eyes, she knew that it was there. And Jupiter says, look, it's pretty useful. It's a bit weird, but it's useful. It gets us into different places. It helps other society members recognize us. And Morrigan points out, but we've got our W pins for that. Like, surely that's what that is for. And he says, no, the distinction is that the pin is for unones, which is non-society members. It's for other people to recognize us as members of the Wondrous Society. The imprint is for us. It's how we recognize each other. It's sort of a family emblem. And those words sort of tug at Morrigan's heart a little bit. She loves that she has this special thing that marks her as a member of a family. But unfortunately, the whole thing has kind of been tainted for her now after last night's inauguration and being outed as a Wundersmith and everyone's reaction to it. And, you know, she's kind of feeling worried, and Jupiter can tell. And he says, listen, you belong in the society as much as any of those other kids. And in fact, more so, because don't forget, you were the one who came out as number 1 on the leaderboard. Morrigan's like, well, the trials are over. What does it matter who was at the top of the leaderboard if none of my unit like me or trust me? And he's trying to be reassuring and says, you know, give it time. It'll be okay. And a message comes for him. Kedri Burns shows up, the concierge, with a message sealed with silver wax, and Jupiter has to rush off, as Jupiter does. And before he goes, Morrigan asks him, like, when do I go back to Woonsock? How do I know? When does school start, basically? And Jupiter's already distracted by whatever he has to now go and do, and he's typically unhelpful and is like, oh, like they'll let you know basically when they need you, don't worry about it. And then he leaves. The other thing that has shown up overnight is a door, a not door, because it doesn't have a doorknob and she can't open it, but it appears to be a door. It has just shown up in her bedroom and she doesn't really know what to do with it. And she still doesn't know when she's supposed to be going to the Wonder Society. And she writes a message to Hawthorne and he doesn't know either. And she asks Dame Chanda, who is the resident soprano who lives at the Hotel Deucalion, and she's also a member of OneSoc. And she sort of brushes it away and says, listen, don't worry. When they want you, they will come and fetch you, believe me, because they are, this is what she says, the society is demanding, intrusive, utterly without consideration for anyone's time or privacy. In short, my angel, when they want you, you will know it. They'll go straight to the source. Basically, they're going to come and get you when they want you. And that is exactly what happens. Oh, first of all, when Morrigan is talking to Dame Chanda, she also mentions that she herself tries not to go to OneSoc too often because she doesn't want anyone getting ideas about roping her into their exploits if she starts showing her face too often. And she says, and I simply couldn't bear to run into Murgatroyd. Who's Murgatroyd? Asked Morrigan. Murgatroyd of Dearborn and Murgatroyd, the scholar mistresses. Dame Chanda shuddered. 2 horrid peas in a frightful pod. Well, perhaps that's unfair. Poor Dearborn's not so bad. We'll come back to that. Murgatroyd's the one to avoid if you can. And the next day, or Monday morning, it turns out Dame Chanda was right. When the society wanted her, she did know about it. She hears a knock on the door that's not a door. Chapter 4, Home Train. Passage of time, change of location. It's a passage of time, change of location double feature. The office that you saw me in the first 3 chapters is, I was staying at my mum's place for a couple of days and I also have an office there. So that was where I was working. And now I'm home. Anyway, Home Train. So Morrigan goes to investigate the knock at the door. She sees a little glowing W, puts 2 and 2 together, presses her W imprint to it, and ta-da! It opens onto something that is kind of part wardrobe, like part walk-in wardrobe, part passageway, because there's another door at the other side, and sort of part utility room. And it's generally empty. It's got hanging space and cabinets and all sorts of things, but the only thing that is there is one outfit, and it's her uniform. It's everything all in black. Just the way she likes it. Black boots, black trousers, black jumper, black coat. The only thing that is not black is a grey shirt. So she goes through the other door and finds herself in a little train station. There are tracks, there's a tunnel, she can hear trains rumbling in the distance. This is clearly, she's not in Kansas anymore. She is not in the Hotel Deucalion. This has led her somewhere else. And there are 9 doors, including hers, all different colours and shapes and sizes, and presumably leading to the 9 homes of all of the members of Unit 919. She realises this because one of them is sitting on the platform already, Cadence Blackburn. And Cadence is once again surprised to find that Morrigan remembers her, and the 2 of them discuss the fact that out of all 9 members of Unit 919, they are the only 2 dangerous entities, and they both required a safeguard pact, although Cadence's only needed 3 signatories. The rest of the unit show up, including Hawthorne, who is his usual excitable, exuberant self, and a train arrives, or not really a train, more just a single carriage. It's a beat-up silver carriage, and it says on the side, Home Train 919. And they are greeted by the warm, lovely, kind, colourful, friendly, just marvellous Miss Cheery, who is their unit conductor. More on that in a moment. She ushers them into the train, and it is kind of like her personality. It's a little bit chaotic and jumbled, but it's comfortable and just warm and wonderful, and it's full of beat up armchairs and a sofa and some beanbags and some cushions, and there's a polar bear shaped biscuit jar, and Miss Cherry promises that it will always be full of biscuits and not you rubbishy biscuits, chocolate biscuits and custard creams and pink party rings, and she says, I have very high biscuit standards. Which honestly, same. We get an introduction, we get an official introduction to all 9 members and their knacks, and I will read it for you now. Lambeth Amara, Short Range Oracle, Cadence Blackburn, Mesmerist, Morrigan Crow, Wundersmith, Francis Fitzwilliam, Gastronomist, Mahir Ibrahim, Linguist, Anar Carlo, Healer, Thaddeus MacLeod, Fighter, Hawthorne Swift, Dragon Rider, and Archon Tate, Pickpocket. That is our Unit 919. Miss Cherry explains a couple of important concepts. One is the fact that this train is their home train. Now, I don't know what school is like where you are from, but when I started high school, when I started grade 8, which was the beginning of high school back when I went there, we were assigned a classroom, which was our homeroom, and a group of students, which was our home group, and a teacher who was our home group teacher. And that was the one class group location that would stay with us throughout all 5 years of high school. And I wanted to give that same sense of continuity and consistency and familiarity and comfort to Unit 919, because I know what I'm throwing them into. I know that Wunsock is not a normal school. The adults, I mean, more to come on this later, but the adults there, they don't really care about these kids. They are too busy doing their own very, very important things. And this unit, I knew that they would need somewhere to feel like they are coming back to. They start their day there, they finish their day there, and Miss Cheery is always there with them. The other concept that Miss Cheery explains is the mundane and arcane school of arts. So there are two schools within this one school. She shows them a poster on the wall. It showed 3 concentric circles like a target sign, a grey outer ring, a white middle ring, and a black circle in the centre. The Wonder Society is split into 2 streams of expertise, the mundane and the arcane. Miss Cheery pointed to the grey outer circle. This big circle here represents the mundane, yours truly included. Hers truly is a tightrope walker, that is her neck. This is the largest Wonder Society sector, engaging in public-facing arts, acts and services comprising NACs based predominantly in the medicinal, sporting, performing, creative, engineering and political disciplines. First line of attack in managing the popular and financial support crucial for the Wonder Society to continue its vital work. Basically, mundanes, as she puts it, charm the public and bring in the money. And she says that their motto inside Wunsock is, just try getting on without us. And then the arcane. So she points to the white middle circle on the poster. This bit represents the arcane, barely a third as many members as the mundane, but just as important, and some people would say twice as powerful. Engaging in private-facing arts, acts and services comprising NACs based predominantly in the magical, supernatural and esoteric disciplines. Your witches, your oracles, your psychic mediums, your sorcerers, and so on. They're usually the first line of defense in protecting the society, the city and the Free State from forces that wish to harm, and their motto is, if not for us, you'd all be speaking zombie. And Cadence asks what the little black circle is in the middle, and Miss Cheery sort of looks at it and says, it just represents all of us as a whole. She tells them to pull up their shirt sleeves or unbutton their coats and show their shirt sleeves, and this is how they know which school they're in. So Morrigan, Anar, Arch, Mahir, Hawthorne, Thadia and Francis are all wearing grey shirts. They are grey sleeves, which represents the School of Mundane Arts, whereas Lambeth and Cadence are wearing white shirts. They are white sleeves in the School of Arcane Arts. And Morrigan doesn't say it out loud, but she does privately think, what is so mundane exactly about being a Wundersmith? It's a really good question, Morrigan. And the final thing that Miss Cheery explains to them is her role as their unit conductor. She says, every new unit in the Wonder Society has a conductor who stays with them for their junior scholar years. My job is to get you where you need to be. I obviously mean that in a practical, day-to-day way. I will physically transport you to and from Wunsock as the conductor of this home train. But she says she's also there to guide and conduct them or navigate them through their 5 junior years in school at Wunsock. And basically her role, alongside all of their patrons and the scholar mistresses who we are yet to meet, her role is to kind of facilitate their entire education for those 5 years. So she lines up various classes for them. She talks to their patrons and the scholar mistresses about what they should and need to be learning to kind of support the development of their NACs, but also of just things that they want to learn or things that their patrons want them to learn. Oh, and she also has to do the logistics side of things of like making sure they have the uniforms and the clothes they need and the kit they need and the equipment and all sorts of things like that. So it's a really big job for a 21-year-old, especially for 9 kids. And I wouldn't have been able to do that when I was 21. I could barely do those things for myself. I can barely do those things for myself now. The last thing that she tells them is that they are going to have their orientation or their VIP tour around Wunsock with Paximus Luck. And some of the other kids are super excited to hear this because apparently Paximus Luck is famous. And the way that Mahir describes him is the famous master illusionist / stealth prankster / vigilante street artist. And they're all thrilled. And Miss Cheery says, oh, he always plans like a big illusion or a big prank for each new unit as he tours them around. So, you know, you're going to have the best day of your life. And that's how the chapter ends. But I just want to explain something about Paximus Luck. or the name Paximus Luck. So I didn't come up with that. You know who came up with that? My, at the time, 3-year-old godchild, my goddaughter Ella. They live in the UK, and we were in Suffolk driving through the countryside, and this 3-year-old just randomly came out with some kind of story about something Paximus Luck. And I was like, I'm sorry, say that again, because obviously I'm obsessed with names. And her mum and dad and I, after she told this story about this made up Paximus Luck, we did a lot of Googling and asking around, and just because we thought, well, maybe she got this from a cartoon or like a book or something, and it just doesn't seem to exist. We concluded she came up with this name out of her amazing brain. And I said, Ella, do you mind if I borrow? Do you mind if I steal the name Paximus Luck to use in the book that I'm writing? This was like years before I ever even had an agent, let alone a book deal. And she was like, yeah, I don't care, I'm 3. I'm paraphrasing. So yeah, thank you, Ella Harris. That's where the name Paximus Luck came from. And many years later, in fact, just kind of at the beginning of 2020, right before COVID hit, and this was the last time that I was in the UK, I bought her and her brother, my 2 godchildren, a puppy for Christmas. And he's a cute little Labradoodle who's now an enormous, gigantic, cute Labradoodle. And they named him Paximus Luck, or Pax for short. And so somewhere in the wilds of Suffolk is a gigantic Labradoodle running around called Paximus Luck. The end. Chapter 5, Dearborn and Murgatroyd. So we arrive at Proudfoot Station, which is the train station inside the Wonder Society grounds. And this scene contains maybe my favourite paragraph I've ever written, just purely based on its deep relatability for me personally. The platform walls were covered with sign-up sheets for all sorts of clubs, groups, bands, and societies within the society. Morrigan didn't like the sound of the goal-setting and achieving club for highly ambitious youth, which met on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings, and all day Sunday, but she thought she could probably get on board with Introverts Utterly Anonymous, which promised no meetings or gatherings of any sort ever. Dream. Sign me up. So we find out that Plucky, which is the nickname for Paximus Luck, Paximus Luck has disappeared the night before he was supposed to take them on their orientation tour, and Miss Cheery is highly sus about this. She's like, that's never happened. He hasn't done that in 25 years. How would she know? She's only 21. But she knows, okay? And Morrigan feels the old feeling. The feeling of something somewhere has gone wrong. This guy has disappeared. This is the second disappearance that she has heard about in a matter of days. And she thinks, oh no, something's gone wrong. I might be to blame. But she shuts it down, to her credit. She shuts it down pretty quickly. It would be hard to undo a lifetime of that conditioning, but she knows now that there was no curse. She's not cursed. Nothing's her fault. We find out that the person who's going to be taking the tour will either be Ms. Dearborn or Mrs. Murgatroyd, whose terrible reputations, particularly Murgatroyd, precede them. And even Nan Dawson, Hawthorne's patron, has given him a word of warning about the scholar mistresses, and particularly about Murgatroyd. Nan said, if I'm going to make trouble, then I'd better hope it's Dearborn who finds out, not Murgatroyd. She said it's best to make yourself as unnoticeable as possible when it comes to Murgatroyd. So we arrive at the beginning of the tour outside Proudfoot House, and we see our tour guide, and this is her description. She was still and statuesque, dressed in typical Wonder Society black, but for the grey shirt front tucked beneath her cloak. Her hair was so blonde it was almost silver, piled on top of her head in an old-fashioned topknot that made her seem much older than her young and unworn face suggested, Morrigan thought. She had the unblemished, moonlight complexion of someone who took excellent care of herself and probably spent an awful lot of time indoors. Her eyes were ice blue, her cheekbones sharp as knives. These things combined could have made her beautiful. Instead, the overall effect was of a glacier in human form, cold, hard, unassailable. She looked down at them from the top step of Proudfoot House as if they were insects she was planning to squash beneath her elegant black shoes. This must be Murgatroyd, Morrigan thought. Bow bow, she's wrong. It's Dulcinea Dearborn, a woman to whom I gave the sweetest possible name I could think of, Dulcinea being the name of the character in Don Quixote and meaning sweetheart, basically, meaning sweet or sweetheart. And she's not that. She is the scholar mistress for the School of Mundane Arts, and she is not happy to have been given the job of touring them around. But but she says, I console myself with the knowledge that you'll enjoy it even less than I will. And then she proceeds to give them this big speech, this not very heartwarming speech. She says, the thing you must remember above all else, scholars, is this: you are not important. She says, you come with the baggage of a lifetime of specialness, of having been the most talented, the cleverest, the most adored and admired in your humdrum little families, schools, and communities. You expect to be coddled and cooed over, lauded and loved. You want all the busy, important grown-ups who walk the grounds of Woonsock to stop in their tracks and admire you. And she goes on to say, everybody at Woonsock has a job to get on with. Every junior and senior scholar, every graduate, every teacher, every patron, every elder, and every master. I'm coming back to that. This speech is awful, but it's kind of important that they hear it, because she's right. All of these kids have been accepted to the Wondrous Society because they have these incredibly special abilities that have set them apart from other kids and other people their entire lives. They have been the star of the show from day one. In most cases, not really in Morrigan's case, obviously. And also, to be fair, not in Cadence's case either. But she is impressing upon them that you are just like every other Wondrous Society member. We were all once the star of the show. We were all the big fish in the little pond. And everyone here is doing big, interesting, important things, and nobody cares about you. Like, nobody's going to hold your little hand or wipe your little nose, she says. And that's really important for them to hear, because it's not like another school, and it's not going to be like any other experience that they've had growing up. And that is why, again, I had to give them Miss Cheery, because I didn't want their school life to be this horrible Dickensian experience of just like grimness and none of these adults really caring for them. Although, some of them do in their own way, but I needed them to have this place that they start and finish their school day, and this person who's going to be there to hold their little handsies. That's why we have Miss Cheery, and that is why I did also give Miss Cheery the most on the nose name that I could possibly think of, Miss Cheery. So we get toured through Proudfoot House by this what Morrigan calls an Arctic shelf of a woman. And I won't take you through the whole thing, because I think that you probably have just read it this week. But essentially, Proudfoot House it's kind of like the main building on this 100-acre campus, but it's not that big. It's 5 stories. It's a 5-story red brick building. But we now realize that it's kind of like a tree, essentially. It is the 5 stories that you see above ground, and then underneath there are 9 subterranean levels, but they are not the size of the house above. It looks like this. This is the 5-story house, and then the 9 levels underneath grow out like a fungus, or like a tree, like the roots of a tree underneath the ground. And it spreads throughout the 100-acre campus, and I think probably beyond out into Nevermoor. And also it has its own transport system, so you can take a brass rail pod to anywhere within the school. It can go in any direction, up, down, left, right, etc. And also, if you have permission, it can take you off campus across the entire Wonderground network. So there's a lot of connectivity in terms of between the school and the rest of Nevermoor. It's just that it's secret and literally underground. So we go through the various levels. The School of Mundane Arts has 3 levels. The School of Arcane Arts has 3 levels. All of the kids can have access to the Mundane Arts levels, but only Lambeth and Cadence get to access the 3 Arcane Arts sub-levels. And there is another introduction to the gross inequity that exists within the Wondrous Society. And it's also kind of a hint at what Morrigan and the rest of them, but especially Morrigan, will discover again and again and again throughout these books, which is that the Wondrous Society has secrets on secrets on secrets. There are inner circles and inner circles and inner circles, and you just really never know when you've gotten to the full truth and the proper inner beating heart of the Wondrous Society. It's a very layered, secretive organization. So the end of the tour comes, and Ms. Dearborn says to Cadence and Lamb, your scholar mistress, Mrs. Murgatroyd, will be along shortly to show you the arcane levels of the school. The rest of you can take a hike. And as she's talking them through kind of doing the housekeeping of reminding them what their responsibilities are and blah, 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 and they're looking around sort of waiting for Mrs. Murgatroyd to show up, a strange transformation is occurring. Here Dearborn paused once again, and something strange happened. Squeezing her eyes tight as if to block out a bright light, she hunched her shoulders up high and rolled them back slowly, twisting her neck like an eel underwater. Morrigan heard the woman's spine crack all the way down, a series of tiny pops in quick succession, and she cringed. The sound of it made her skin crawl. Further along it says, the glass-slick voice was all but gone. She spoke in a frightening, guttural rasp that had an awful sing-song musicality about it. It sounded wrong. She has her eyes closed and then she opens them and Morrigan sees what none of the other kids have quite noticed yet. Dearborn was different. On their own, the changes were subtle. A sloping curve to her shoulders, a deepening of the hollow in her cheeks. Her ice-blue eyes had lightened to a dead, murky, pale grey, the colour of a flat winter sky, and sunk further into her skull. The top knot on her head was no longer a shining silver blonde, but white, stark and stripped of colour. Her lips, purpling and cracked, peeled back in an unpleasant leer, revealing a mouthful of sharp brownish teeth. And Ms. Dearborn had just asked a question and said, "Isn't that so, Mrs. Murgatroyd?" And the reason that the other kids didn't notice this transformation happening is because they had all looked around to see where Mrs. Murgatroyd is coming from. But Morrigan is watching Ms. Dearborn and she sees this happen and she sees her say, "Just so, Ms. Dearborn," rasped the woman, answering her own question. So Ms. Dearborn and Mrs. Murgatroyd are two people in one body. Two not very nice, scary, mean people in one body that changes quite dramatically from person to person. Yeah, that's Dearborn and Murgatroyd.